There was nothing Hans could do after being flanked by guards as he neared the end of the tunnel, and shortly after apprehending their target, the castle guards began escorting their prisoner back through the tunnels until they reached a passage that led them to a small iron door. "Get that door open," ordered the guard that had been placed in charge of this particular search party. One of the men stepped forward and reached for the handle but was stopped by his captors pleading. Hang on now, just hold on a second," Hans said as he turned to face the guard who'd been ordering his men around. "Obviously you know who I am, which means you know what I'm worth." The guard lifted his hand in a gesture to let his men know to stand down. Hans began to smirk. "Now, if you simply let me go and pretend as if you never found me, you will be repaid handsomely." Hans then gestured to the other guards standing around him. "All of you will, I guarantee it." "It's funny, I'd been told that the guard on the Southern Isles could be bought," the guard began to say. "And considering how openly you just spoke of bribery, it must be true. That place truly lacks honor, doesn't it?" Hans' smile quickly disappeared from his face. "Open the door," ordered the guard. The heavy iron door swung open and Hans was escorted through the kitchen. He looked around the room as he passed through, but there was no sign of the cook who had sold him out. And just as he was turning his head, scanning the room for the man that had sold him out, he was being pushed through the threshold into the hallway by the guard who had been walking behind him. As Hans made his way through the torchlit hallway, he couldn't help but consider what was about to happen to him. "I'm done for. As soon as she sees me, it's over," Hans thought to himself. "I wonder what Lars would tell me if he could see me now." Hans had been so deep in thought that he hadn't noticed his pace had slowed down until he was shoved in the back by the guard who was following behind him. "Keep it moving! The Queen is just up ahead!" Hans sped up a little bit. His heart began to race with each step that he took, knowing that it brought him closer to Elsa, the one person who he dreaded to see more than his own father. As the guarded escort rounded the corner, Hans was faced with large double doors that brought him back to a few months before then, when he had to face his father after failing to take Arendelle the first time. 4 guards stood outside of the doors, 2 on each side, and as they saw Hans being escorted forward, they began to open the doors. A gust of cold air came pouring out of the room as the doors slowly swung open, and inside Hans could see Queen Elsa, who was sitting on her throne at the head of the throne room. Hans froze at the sight of her scowling face and was forced into the throne room by his escort of guards. "We have your intruder, Queen Elsa," said the head guard. "Hans," Elsa said calmly, "I must say I half expected the rumor to have been false." Hans kept his eyes on the floor. "It takes a lot of courage to come back to a place that you are unwelcome and to be caught trespassing in the castle, no less." Elsa paused for a second. "Courage, or foolishness, I suppose. You will tell me why you are here." Hans gritted his teeth before looking up to Elsa, who was still sitting on her throne. "How did you even know I was here?" Elsa grinned before returning to a scowling glare. "I'll ask the questions here." Hans began to glare back toward the Queen of Arendelle. "Why did you break into my castle? Hoping to finish what you started the last time you were here? Is that it?" Elsa stood from her throne as she grew more and more upset. "Are you here to kill me, Hans?" "Kill you?" Hans asked. "I never intended to kill you, at least not at first. But that's what you want to hear. You want a confession, is that right?" Elsa's eyes widened at Hans' snarky attitude. "Clearly you don't understand your situation. You will tell me why you are here, and you will face your punishment." Hans scoffed. "If you're going to kill me, just do it already." "We don't do that here," Elsa responded. "However, the same can't be said for the Southern Isles, can it? If I were to send you back there and notify your father of your crimes against Arendelle, I doubt you would end up in the stables with the rest of the animals." Hans locked eyes with Elsa. "You're not going to get anything from me." "I figured as much, but let's see what a little bit of time in our dungeons will do for you. And if nothing changes, we will just have to make arrangements to send you back home." Elsa turned to a pair of guards that were standing up near the throne. "Secure the prisoner." The two guards stepped forward, and that was when Hans noticed that they both had been holding a pair of iron shackles. The first guard directed Hans to lift his arms forward with both of his wrists next to each other. The cold shackles were placed around his wrists before being locked shut. As the second guard approached and began to kneel down to lock Hans' legs together, he was stopped by his queen. "Not the legs, just his arms will do. He must be able to get somewhat comfortable if he's going to start thinking straight," she said. The guard stood up and backed away from Hans before placing the shackles on the ground behind him. "Now bring the prisoner to the dungeon," Elsa ordered the three guards that were standing around Hans. "And be sure to bring him some dinner after you have all eaten and dinner service has ended. Can't have him dying on an empty stomach before we have another chance to talk." After Hans had his hands bound together in chains, he was promptly escorted by three guards into the castle dungeon, which consisted of 3 empty cells, one of which was opened up for Hans to go inside. Hans stepped into his stone prison and turned to face the guards. "Now you stay quiet until the Queen tells us what to do with you," said one of the guards as he closed the metal door to Hans' cell. Hans didn't reply. He just pressed his back to the cold wall of his cell and slowly slouched down into a seated position. "That's good," said the guard, as they turned and walked away. Hans was alone for what seemed like hours, though he had no way of knowing. After a little while in silence, he slowly began to lose himself in thought, as he often did. "How could I end up here again? I'm not long for this world, that's for sure." Hans sighed as he leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. "If Elsa doesn't execute me, surely Father will. I wonder what Father's going to think of this. I've let him down again. If only I could cast him aside as Lars had." That was when Hans' train of thought shifted to his brother, the only member of his family who ever treated him with any kindness. "Lars would think me a fool for putting myself into this trap. I should have just listened to him and left. He knew that I was just as tired of it as he was, but I just couldn't listen to him," Hans thought to himself as he lightly tapped the back of his head against the wall, cringing at the thought of disappointing Lars after he had supported him so much. "What was all of this for, anyway, so I can finally get respect from the great King George?" Hans scoffed at the thought. That sorry excuse probably wouldn't have given it to me anyways. Lars truly was the only one who ever had my back and wanted me to be better, and I just cast him aside at the first chance I got. Hans' train of thought was interrupted at the sound of the dungeon door being opened. He opened his eyes to see 2 guards walking down the narrow hallway toward his cell with what appeared to be a small plate with food on it. Before the guards made it halfway across the room, Hans spoke. "Bring that back. I won't be needing it right now. Let the Queen know I'm ready to talk." The pair of guards stopped in their tracks and looked at each other, and after a second shrugged their shoulders, turned around, and began walking out of the dungeon. It wasn't long before Hans' cell was being opened and he was being escorted back into the throne room to meet with Elsa once again, only this time of his own accord. This time, when he was escorted into the throne room, Elsa appeared to be less agitated, and though her look still couldn't be considered a happy one. As Hans approached the throne, she spoke bluntly. "What is it you have to say?" Hans hung his head low. "Queen Elsa, I've been in search of approval for far too long from people who are far less deserving of my effort. In the process, I have let down the one person who wanted me to do what's right." Elsa was taken aback by the tone of Hans' voice. He'd never spoken so respectfully to her before in their few interactions. And what surprised her more was that Hans sounded sincere. "I was tasked by my father, King George of the Southern Isles, to infiltrate Arendelle and try to overthrow the kingdom once again." Hans was cut off. "Once again?" Elsa questioned sternly. Hans paused before responding. "Yes, it was my father who sent me over here during your coronation ceremony in hopes of working my way into the royal family." Elsa's face slowly went from pale to red as she began to take deeper breaths. "Continue," she said through her teeth. "My father is a man who takes what he wants, and when he can't have it, he gets aggressive, and that's what this was," Hans explained. "He sent me here to find a way to take you down and take over Arendelle for ourselves." Elsa cut Hans off. "And he sent you because to him you were expendable." Hans nodded. He sent me and my brother here. He was supposed to watch over me, but he's long held disdain for my father and the way he's treated us, and when the Duke ambushed us and forced me to steal from you, Lars decided that he had had enough. I was a fool, though. Hans paused. I needed my father's approval, so I went along with the Duke's plan, and I infiltrated your castle to steal the document that's in my breast pocket. The Duke? The Duke of Wesselton? Asked Elsa. Hans nodded. That wretched little weasel, Elsa said, which caused Hans to chuckle. What is this document? It's a letter, Hans began to explain, from your mother. The Duke believed that the secrets in the letter could lead to the fall of the kingdom. Elsa signaled for a member of her guard to retrieve the letter from Hans' jacket. Hans looked up to Elsa. My father is a monster, and I wish I had heeded my brother's warning. I will accept any punishment that you see fit for me, but please, don't send me back there. Elsa retrieved the letter from the guard and began to read it to herself. Her eyes grew wide at what was concealed inside. Why did I never receive this? She asked herself aloud before looking out toward her prisoner. The queen let out a loud exhale before beginning to approach Hans. As she got closer to him, she began to speak. I will not send you back to the Southern Isles, and no one will know of this transgression. Hans let out a sigh of relief. That doesn't mean you'll go unpunished, Elsa continued. You have committed many crimes with the intention to harm me and my family. That being said, you have also given me something that is more valuable to me than anyone could possibly know. And for that, you will receive a punishment, but it will be a just one. Hans hung his head low. Thank you, Queen Elsa. You are free from the chains of your father, but make no mistake, King George will learn that Arendelle is not to be trifled with. The real question is, whose side will you land on when that happens? Elsa questioned Hans as she turned to walk back to her throne. And worry not. Here you will not spend your evenings out in the cold among the animals. Take him back to the dungeon until we can have a proper prison room made up for him. I have a lot to think about. Elsa looked back down to the letter that Hans had found for her as he was slowly escorted back out of the throne room with his father's plans officially put to an end.